Most videos of this type, and there's certainly no shortage of them here on YouTube, end up talking about one of a few things: oil, inefficient production of certain types of tanks, or that the Soviet Union was simply too big to conquer. People will talk for hours about why it all went wrong, and people react to videos of people talking about why it went wrong for hours, and sometimes people even react to videos of people reacting to videos of people talking about why it all went wrong. I think it was over much earlier than any of those videos suggest. Hitler never wanted war with Britain and France. He'd gambled his way this far and bloodlessly added Austria, Czechoslovakia and Memel to the Reich without too much of a bother. British public opinion and even many in the government publicly sympathised with Hitler and saw these as just causes. They were all, except for Bohemia and Moravia from Czechoslovakia, all ethnically German areas after all.
So without comment, we present the story of Germany's march into Austria, across the bridge over the river Salza into Salzburg.
Even up until the day he declared war on Poland, Hitler didn't believe Britain would follow up on their guarantee. Out of all the diplomatic incidents so far, this was the one that made the most sense. Danzig was an entirely German city, and even Chamberlain said his terms to Poland were extremely generous. But after a period of confusion and uncertainty, Hitler was proved wrong, and Britain sent an ultimatum and declared war. When Hitler got the news, he stared blankly at Ribbentrop and asked him, "What now?" In the end though, Germany got down to business, blitzkrieg style. Germany was unprepared for war, and the French alone had more tanks than Germany, never mind Britain and France combined. The only way they could win was via their blitzkrieg tactics, which worked so well in Poland. But for anyone unfamiliar with basic geography, Great Britain is an island, and you can't drive a tank across the English Channel. No one really wanted this war, but the Allies didn't want to lose prestige by accepting Hitler's incessant peace offers. British public opinion was massively in favour of ending it. Danzig, the point of the war, was already in German hands anyway, with no real means of getting it back without millions of dead. The phony war period lasted for 8 months and nothing really happened, until one man, who didn't care about the cost, stepped up to the plate. Winston Churchill had been living in shame for years since the First World War, where his Gallipoli adventure ended in over 300,000 British, French, Aussie and Kiwi casualties. During the interwar period, he fell into crippling debt. He sold forged copies of paintings by a dead French artist and other similar activities to get by, until one day, a shadowy group called The Focus, led by an Austrian-born banker named Sir Henry Strakosch, who moved to Britain after making a fortune in the South African gold mines, paid off Winston Churchill's debts one day, and began paying him massive sums of money to become a literal paid shill to push for war with Germany. Other members of the British and Commonwealth cabinets at the time were being paid by Strakosch. Even the Czech government was giving money to Strakosch to pay off these British ministers to overthrow Chamberlain and cause a war with Germany. In July 1938, a single payment alone was roughly £2 million through the Czech embassy. Hitler himself caught wind of the plan via Goering's wiretap agency and sent all the evidence to the British ambassador to show to Chamberlain. Churchill, First Lord of the Admiralty at the time, pushed the British government into an invasion of Norway to cut off Germany's steel supply, which came primarily from both Norway and Sweden. Hitler found out and beat them to the punch by one day. After this mess, Chamberlain was ousted from office, and the very man who pushed for the mess, Churchill, came into office. On the exact same day, Germany's patience had run out.
Oh my god, bro. Oh, hell no, man.
A favourite boomer myth that has stuck around since then is, lucky we stopped Hitler invading, or we'd all be speaking German. Operation Sea Lion was never a serious consideration for Hitler. It was never going to happen. If anything, it was more of a negotiation tactic. It would have been impossible to cross the British Channel. The difference in the size of their navies was simply too big. Even in the air, Germany never had control. The same goes for any crazy alt history where Germany invades America, like that one TV show. That's nearly impossible logistically in late game Hearts of Iron, never mind in real life. It was never an option or even desired by Hitler. Sorry, Wolfenstein. Hitler wrote in Mein Kampf and spoke for hours in speeches about how much he loved the British and their empire, and it was his dream alliance. If only they'd make peace with him. The only way to end this war, which was all but over in his mind, was a peace with Britain. To him, it only made logical sense. The continuing refusals frequently drove him into uncontrolled rage. He offered the British to completely keep their empire, he would guarantee it, and if it was ever attacked, he would send divisions immediately to defend it. He was open to the idea of getting Germany's old colonies as perhaps the only thing they'd have to give up. All he wanted most of all was for Britain to stop the war and accept his position on the continent. But Chamberlain, never mind Churchill, refused to accept any of these. After all, what did Britain have to gain by continuing the war? After coming to power, Churchill was on a mission to stop the massively growing peace movement at home. Even the most liberal, normie historians called Churchill's government a kind of war party dictatorship. Less than 2 weeks after coming to power, he locked up the most prominent pro-peace advocate without trial, Oswald Mosley, and his wife, Churchill's own relative. She'd just given birth and had an 11-week-old son. Both her children were not allowed to join her in prison, and the Mosleys weren't released until Mosley became gravely ill 3 years later. Churchill could not accept peace. France was invaded the exact same day he became Prime Minister, and if he accepted defeat now, he would be blamed forever. He discovered a back-channel peace offer making progress through the British and German embassies in Washington, via a Quaker intermediary. He shut that down and banned access to the German ambassador. He needed to swing British public opinion to his side, and the only way to do this was if they joined the suffering of the war. Otherwise, it would all seem a world away across the channel, and eventually, his government will be brought down for the sake of peace. On the same day he snuffed out that peace deal, he summoned Air Chief Marshal Charles Portal, asking, when is the earliest a savage attack can be launched on Berlin? Up until now, there was an agreement between the two sides not to bomb population centres. The British had hit several major cities already with minor casualties, but Hitler stuck firmly to the agreement. He was disgusted by the thought of killing British civilians.
I told him we will have the opportunity to attack London, and he said, stop it, stop it. I don't want to hear this. The whole attack on England is against my opinion, against my willing. I could stop it. The English population is of such high class, and they are so similar to the Germans that I hate to fight England.
Portal warned Churchill against this, stating the obvious that if he began hitting the German capital, the Germans would stop going only for naval dockyards and airfields and reply by decimating British cities. 2 weeks later, Charles de Gaulle finds to his confusion Winston Churchill in his country home garden, shaking his fist at the sky, shouting, "Why won't you come?" Confused by this, he finally understood later. On the 24th of August, Churchill found his excuse. A German plane missed its target, an oil refinery, and hit London, killing some chickens and collapsing a few old buildings. No one was killed. At 9 AM the next morning, Churchill was already on the phone with Bomber Command in High Wycombe, demanding 100 bombers attack Berlin in response that same night. 30 got through and caused havoc in Berlin. Then he repeated this 6 or 7 times. Hitler refused to respond by hitting British cities. Eventually, Hitler felt he had no choice and replied by bombing cities too. Churchill had what he wanted. To stiffen morale and make it seem like Britain was fighting back, artillery and naval guns were installed around London and would fire at oncoming aircraft to give the appearance of defending the city. But in reality, it was known that these did not work. They were not anti-aircraft guns. The shells simply came back down to earth and exploded, and in the end, around half of the British civilian casualties were actually inflicted by their own side purely for appearance's sake. As a result, morale turned into the classic image of the Blitz myth. Everyone joined together to beat Hitler no matter the cost. The back and forth of unrestricted terror bombing had begun. There was no going back. Fighting such a war costs money, a lot of it. Just like the Soviet Union did a year later, Britain was entirely dependent on American aid. Unlike the Soviets, however, Britain had to pay for it. When the gold ran out to pay them, they began selling off all of their investments, built up over hundreds of years in the empire for pennies on the dollars, to the Americans. To continue the war, he gave away willingly to President Roosevelt, who absolutely hated the empire and often talked about wanting it destroyed. More than Hitler, who had spent decades professing his love for the empire, could have possibly taken by force or in a peace settlement. The result to come must have been obvious. Britain would never recover. One thing to note about Churchill is while he was making all these decisions, he was drunk. Every Second World War diary of anyone who knew him is just full of references of him being blind drunk more often than not, getting progressively worse throughout the war. Patton notes on one occasion that he was so drunk during a meeting with the Sultan of Morocco that he made him hideously offended. Field Marshal Allenbrook and Admiral Cunningham, among others, would constantly complain that talking to him was like bashing their heads against the wall. They could get nowhere, and he would just incoherently, drunkenly ramble. On a more serious occasion, Cunningham said, "There is no doubt the PM is fit to discuss anything. Too tired and too much alcohol. He was in a terrible mood this evening, rude and sarcastic. Had a couple of blows with him about the Far East. The net result was that we sat from 10 p.m. until 1:45 a.m. listening to him talk mostly nonsense and got nowhere." That same day, July the 6th, 1944, a document was issued to the Chiefs of Staff ordering the dropping of poison gas and 2 million anthrax bombs on German towns and cities. The British tested a single one of these bombs on an abandoned Scottish island in 1942. The result was that it was uninhabitable until 1986, when it was decontaminated and a flock of sheep was placed there. Good job the Chiefs of Staff didn't go through with this order, otherwise there would be no Europe today.
Julian!
How do you negotiate with a man whose entire reputation rests on not negotiating with you, is literally being paid a fortune by shadowy international groups to defeat you, is willing to blow up tens of thousands of his own people, give away absolutely all of his country's foreign investments to defeat you, and to top it off is a crippling alcoholic who's lost all touch with reality? It needs to be noted that in 1940, Hitler wasn't viewed as the psychopath he is today. Up until the terror bombing, the war had been fairly cordial between the two armies. As the war progressed, that's when things spiraled out of control. Who knows what tragedies could have been avoided by making peace when it was possible. So no matter how much Hitler wanted to, there was nothing he could do either to negotiate or defeat the British. If you took Egypt, or even all of Africa if you wanted to push things to the extremes of potential outcomes, nothing would be changed. Great Britain would still be standing, and there would be no surrender. The Americans joining the war was inevitable. Roosevelt was hell-bent on getting involved in whatever way he could, so peace was now or never. And now, it was never. For centuries, Germany's biggest fear has been a war on two fronts. Being in the middle of Central Europe has resulted in them being the filling in a war sandwich, and war with the Soviet Union was also one day inevitable. The two ideologies of the regimes were mortal enemies after all. The Soviets were growing in strength, and Hitler was left with a very small window to knock them out, no matter how unlikely, to avoid being encircled when the British and Americans inevitably came knocking. But this time, they would have all of Russia's rich resources, if they could pull it off. In reality though, it was never going to be a quick war, and the Soviets weren't going to be defeated fast enough to get out of this war alive. That's why I believe as of August 24th, when that bomb fell off target and hit London, it was all over there and then. With the public behind Churchill on the back of the Blitz propaganda, he was free to bomb and then later firebomb Germany into submission. Britain, mixed with the industrial strength of America and with the manpower of the Soviet Union, could never have ended any other way except with Germany in a pile of rubble. Even if they couldn't land on the beaches and regain a foothold immediately, German cities would have been bombed in an endless terror cycle. Their resources were almost endless. They fought as best they could. Making it to 1945 was a feat in itself, but it was always going to end one way. Churchill is revered as a national hero in Britain still to this day. The cracks are beginning to show, but I think enough time has passed now that we can honestly talk about him. No matter how much cope we throw at it, like Niall Ferguson's final quote from his book Empire, there was no need to destroy ourselves for that war. In 1939, the Hitler the world knew on the eve of war only had the Knight of the Long Knives to his name, his own men. Stalin had tortured, executed and starved millions, and a year later Churchill would throw himself at Stalin's feet and ultimately give him Danzig and the rest of Poland, which is why we joined the war in the first place. He took the rest of Eastern Europe to rub things in even more. There is no possible cope for why the myth of World War II, which has fundamentally shaped our current society, was necessary. In the end, I guess I just don't think ethnically German Danzig was worth giving away Western civilization for.